Alright, welcome back once again. First bit is pretty exciting news. I got a new mic stand, so currently what you're hearing is me speaking to a mic, which is the same one as before, but now hopefully with way less bumping and bashing around and little mic disturbances that you've been hearing in the previous behind the sessions. I've always, for the actual proper Wollen retold, which is a lot more serious than this unscripted me just talking too much for 30 minutes, I always put myself in a broom closet had me very kind of bent forward on a chair. It's very hard to describe in words. It's a whole mess. Now, slightly more professional, albeit still using my sound padding as pillows and blankets and a duvet and, the whole thing. But at least in this case, when I'm being less committed to an actual serious recording space and I'm just sitting at my computer desk, you are still able to hear me with less disruptions to the audio. So that's a nice thing. Now the second thing to announce before we get into it is that I know I regret this every time I say it, but I might actually be telling the truth today. I don't think there's as much to talk about this time. This may actually be a shorter episode, and I guess we're about to find out if that's actually true. Of course, you guys already know. You can see the timestamp and see whether or not I was miraculously unable to hold up my promise. Let's try to go for sub 25 minutes, maybe around 20 if we're lucky. And now the reason there's less to talk about is because a lot of the things were kind of just flowing off the consequences of what happened last time. In fact, they, slaying a dragon, being awesome, and then of course by the end of the session, as you've probably watched the episode already, I hope, eventually they do that very evening get to go and talk with the president and get to find out that fame isn't going to come quite as easy as they had hoped, especially considering they had already made particularly past choices that caused some issues. But we can get to president at the end. The only real thing I think is worth kind of providing as far as exposition and information for this episode is how the magical Emporium, the beholder inside of it, Simon, and the wishing well are all three prime examples, all wrapped together over in the city of Labrie they finally get to go visit, the actual capital city of Wollen. They all encapsulate a major thing that, a theme, I suppose you could say, that I'm starting to play with as we get towards the second half of Wollen's full story. And what that is, at the time I was making this, as you probably established by now, this was the first ever time that I ran a D&D campaign ever. Coming in almost completely blind, having damn near no idea what I was doing, absolutely no experience, never been a player. I didn't know what D&D was until very, very, very short time before I actually started running a whole campaign that lasted a year. And what that was that I was trying to do and test it out was that once I realised this would be coming to an end soon, by the end of the year, it just wouldn't work that we can continue playing without at least a large break. So I figured concluding this so small in scale and size and length, I suppose, story that we were telling, but still felt like it had quite a few beats to hit, was that I was going to try testing out a large variety of not even just magic, just in general, a lot of massive mechanics that I strongly believed, and had originally avoided for this exact reason, would be rather overpowered or risk even just breaking the game entirely, even though they would probably be very cool in the process. But as we got closer towards what felt like this would not last forever, this was like halfway through a year at this point, half the sessions along, makes sense, that's when I started to realise, okay, if I ever want to try and test out some of these ridiculous things, and I can't mention them all yet because that's still a surprise for you to watch with what's coming up, but you'll see soon enough some of these very, very wacky and very insane things to try and do in a D&D campaign, especially a sandbox one, where it's like not predestined and it really is up to what the players do to decide how it all goes down. Some very bold choices are able to be made with the mechanics that I set up. And thankfully, they didn't quite implode the entire universe. quite. But one of the first sort of things we played with today was the wish spell, which is something I had danced around when my players would ask about it previously, especially because I could disregard it as I was still like low level, this was early. But now it was more prevalent to at least bring up the idea, and hence using the wishing well as a means to introduce the concept. I did something that, as a DM, I do not recommend that you almost ever do outside of one-shots. Most of these ideas are really fun for one-shots, but do not ever make things so unnecessarily broken the way that I do, because this was intentionally me stress testing. I thought at a certain point, well, I hope it doesn't happen, but if these things I introduce could potentially break the campaign because I give my players access to such incredible power and they use it and it causes things to go awry, as it very well could do because the dice would decide, then fine, I accept that. And the wish spell, in regards to my first of many of features that I tried to implement in the second half of Wollen that could be potentially broken, was simply allowing the actual wish spell to not come with the very well and intentionally designed drawbacks or limitations that the mechanics set the wish spell in the actual player's handbook. Basically meaning, I would let them literally wish for damn near anything, like a full-on genie, with the only exceptions being like you can't wish for more wishes, that sort of thing. But there were no massive general restrictions at all. They could quite literally wish for just about damn near anything, and I would have gone with it. I probably would have tried to use the monkey paw effect of making them wish for something and, depending on their wording, find a way for it to be misconstrued while still upholding their own words, so that it kind of punishes them in a way. So that way there's at least some drawback to using such a powerful thing. But for the most part, unless it seemed really necessary to do so, if what they were asking for was so insane, then they could do just about anything. And I was fully on board with that. And the idea being in my world, the only thing that rivals that amount of power of a wish spell is the Deck of Many Things and its effects as an incredibly powerful and extreme item, which will come up more in coming sessions. But yeah, it's pretty stressful to say, yeah, you guys could wish for just about anything. And then, of course, I do this myself, it's my own fault. I give them a wishing well and say, hey, go ahead and roll a D100, and if you roll below your level, you can make a wish. You get one chance, and if you don't land it the first time, you don't even get a second chance to do it. But until then, that's your pretty much only easy free access option to have a wish granted before you have to get to high level. And obviously, at a certain point, as I'm well aware, that becomes a much bigger problem. Whether or not, the wish thing is something that would need to be tweaked, because once you get to, I don't know what it is, level something, maybe 16, completely guessing here, haven't looked it over, again, never been a player, but high-level spellcasters can cast the wish spell at will, which is terrifying when you consider what I allowed that power to do. In case I'm not being clear enough, when I mean almost any sort of power, I do mean things like they could literally wish for the ultimate BBG of the game to die, or never have existed in the first place, for example. It would completely affect the world entirely, and I really am not exaggerating when I say, as a DM, I will go to the effort to do the work to rearrange and reorganize how all of that affects everything in a butterfly effect. Foreshadowing implied. Beyond that, because there's not too much to talk about right now, because of course, as we know, they didn't actually get to make any of their wishes, I allowed the poor buggers instead to visit the Magical Emporium, which is a really big deal, because the Magical Emporium is, again, like I said, extending upon this idea of saying, screw it, let's open up the world and really allow for the ability to, if able to find a way, allow the players to achieve certain things and have at least the option, the door open, they have to find their own way to get to as an obstacle or a challenge presented to them, like a puzzle, that if they can get to X factor, they achieve Y, in the sense of, I'm not going to give them unlimited money or allow them just to take any sort of, powerful legendary artifact from the Magical Emporium shop at will if they want it. I won't just give it to them, but they can, if they tried really hard and worked their best and figured something out, if they found a way that I deemed acceptable, being very fair, of course, as a DM, making it hard, but definitely respecting if they make a creative, outside-the-box choice and supporting and answering the questions and helping them achieve it. If they are, I can see them trying to work towards something. And in this case, being able to enjoy the the benefit of being able to have access to every powerful item in the game, if they have the money or the wits in order to convince someone to give them to them, then I fully allow that. And Palin put that right to work straight away, played by Zach, of course, as he very quickly, in this session as we saw, tried to maneuver his way into getting his hands on a wish scroll, having heard about how powerful these things could be and being very excited at the prospect. And of course, how fitting for his character Palin to literally betray his other character Zook and sell him out literally to achieve this, selling his other character away against his consent in order to achieve what he wants as the greedy loot goblin Palin that he started role-playing the guy as. That was really fun to see. I gushed enough about Zach last time, but obviously can still at least point out that I'm still very proud and very impressed that he was willing to literally sell his, what I have to imagine was probably his more fun character, that being Zook. I imagine it was more enjoyable for him to play a murder hobo, arsonist, just rampaging toddler-sized monstrosity, and still, he was more than willing just to give him up and sell him out despite playing Zook as well, allowing himself to roleplay being blindsided by himself. Again, I could go on and on about how much I am very, very keen on the idea of how Zach does his acting and how he plays with his own characters with each other. But did that enough of that last time. Don't want to embarrass the guy any further by continuously singing his praises for all to hear. What few people do, of course, watch these, compared to the main series. Not that I mind, unscripted, right? This is not me at my best by any means. I'm just yakking. I just get to relax and kind of take it easy with these things. So, between the Wishing Well, between the Magical Emporium, and then, of course, we have the Beholder, Simon, who is the great example of me having to choose, alright, I want to have an anti-theft security system, obviously, something in place beyond just a few guards inside the door like most shops, to act as a more fun and creative way of making an obstacle for the players to try and steal, and having an astral pocket dimension, sorry, not necessarily astral pocket dimension, but a pocket dimension. I must be careful not to say or imply too much. But having basically this sort of beholder guardian watch over the Magical Emporium. Again, I'm going to be very careful not to give too much away because when I designed and wrote this character into the Magical Emporium and tying it into the lore and history of it, my players to this day are yet to fully know quite a bit about Simon or the Magical Emporium or its history or anything about that, which is exciting for me because I've known for a long time quite a few little neat things about it, and I look forward to them finally getting to uncover that at one point, hopefully. But the Magical Emporium and Simon and its history made it really fun to dance around slight hints and implications when Dane was having a little talk with him after he very quickly realised that he had made a terrible mistake in thinking he could actually so easily steal something from the Emporium itself, the biggest and most powerful building perhaps in the entire world of Felion, which is the world which Wollen, an island, is set inside. And it is pretty... Oh, it's fun. Damn. It's a shame I cannot talk about more. The point just being that, you know what? I'm going to play it safe, and to keep on time, I will not dance around too much more, because I'm sure at some point my players will come by to listen to this, just to listen the ears in and see if I slip up at all, or release anything that's that I might forget to edit out if I had to. I very rarely edit these at all, though. The idea is to keep it unscripted, keep it just my consciousness randomly firing off like, neurons, and just making about as little sense out loud as they do in my head. So, for the sake of my own safety, and not regretting all these years of building up and foreshadowing and having established lore just to be thrown away by splurting out at the wrong moment, I will move on. And I'll finalise on talking about the only real main thing that I think is worth of too much note right now in this session, as a bit of, like we said, an intermediary session between the last one, the one to come, which is, of course, set up at the end here by having them finally get to meet President Andrew Linnell himself, which is very exciting. Mostly for me, because the players sure as hell did not find him exciting. They didn't like him at all, for obvious reasons. Like the cliffhanger we left it on. But the President, as I've mentioned before, I believe, when I designed Doris to be an antagonist, when I did that in leading up to Session 3, when I realised I would need to build a new sort of gang mob boss to have some sort of consequence to the Staff of Fire rampage that Zook was going on, a way to kind of test whether or not, he was ready for the responsibility that came with having such power. He evidently was not. So with Doris, I already knew about President Andrew Linnell. He was designed from the start. His whole thing was being hard on crime and being very much trying to, in almost an authoritarian dictator sense, definitely stretching the sort of, putting his toes quite a bit, or his hooves, I guess, across the line a bit. The idea was to kind of make this guy a hard ass, a bit too serious about his job, though, you're the president, you're in charge of the whole city, maybe that is more of a favourable trait than a negative one in that light, but regardless, obviously his means were not exactly the best way of justifying his actions. The guy was clearly a little bit unhinged, maybe a little bit enjoying power a little bit too much. And that was intentional, that they would come in. I initially thought and challenged myself to see if I could make this not be the case, or at least sway the players more, which seemed to work, in order to like Doris instead. But the idea was originally that they probably wouldn't like Doris after, he murdered one of them, and had they decided they didn't like him despite my efforts to showcase this character of Doris that I had made, which had taken a strong inspiration from Negan in The Walking Dead, which I've mentioned before, then they would have still gone with, most likely, the rebels that were presented to them, and the rebels, as you remember, did get sold out by the party to Doris, and that became a whole thing. They gained more loyalty and reputation in the Tooth-Taker group by doing so, and Doris became more fond of them, and that really cemented them together. But it did, it was at the cost of lives of people trying to do the right thing and take down these Tooth-Takers that obviously are not perfect people themselves, and thus they would have started working with Andrew. And Andrew was more, unhinged entirely compared to Doris in his own way, because they're both, they do bad things, they're both bad people in their own sense. One is definitely living by the law, and one isn't, and the entire point, of course, naturally, is that I am writing them so that that does not mean anything. It was fun because, I wanted to avoid the obvious cliche that the person on the side of the law is good and the person who is breaking the law is bad, but I also wanted to avoid the lesser cliche that's still general enough, where you swap these two things around and all of a sudden, the person in charge of the law, who is obviously, as we've seen so far, not the greatest guy, but he's not directly evil. And nor is Doris. The idea is just to take, I guess, when I've painted it like that, it doesn't seem, it's not necessarily cliche, but it's certainly not the most, it's not the most creative thing you've ever heard in storytelling, which is that I made two characters on either side of a certain issue be morally grey and complicated. I'm sure that's not the first time that's ever happened in media, not by a long shot. But still, I like doing that, and I like having some flexibility, and had they gone with Andrew and worked with him, and acted as spies underneath the whole operation of the Tooth-Takers, or however it would have played out, it would have been really fun to see how far Andrew could go, and what he could reveal to them, what he would keep to himself, and how much things he could ask the players to do, before the players themselves might start to think about how they don't like Doris, and thus they worked with the president. But now they're thinking, okay, we're seeing the man in charge who is giving us his instructions, what he's doing, and we're starting to have second thoughts about whether or not he's actually doing the right thing for the right reasons. And that could have been really fun and messy. But as it worked out, evidently they did not see him as the threat that he could be in the small time they got to meet him, which is fair enough. But it was quite the shame that poor old Dane had his life cut very alarmingly short after riding such a high of slaying that dragon, when he seriously underestimated how powerful politicians' words can be. I butcher that pretty terribly in my phrasing just then, but thankfully I still didn't butcher it quite as badly as the poor dwarf got butchered by the horseman. And as I keep my promise, it seems, this is coming on 20 minutes almost perfectly, and I do not believe there is too much more worth discussing yet, as you can probably imagine. There's a little bit more meat to discuss next time. More than you're probably expecting as well. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for enjoying the first time I've actually had a short behind the sessions. And if you do enjoy listening to these, stay tuned for the next one, because things will never be the same after the next episode. Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you next time.